Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. Now, the December year-end champion ranking series, and we are well underway. We already have ranked the 2023 champions, all 6 classes, class individual, top 10s, and we did part 1 of top 20 champions. So that means that in this video, we are gonna have the 10 of absolutely best of the best champions in the game right now, in my personal opinion, with a heavy-handed emphasis in my opinion. In this list, obviously, it is impossible to be objective entirely. We do not have objective statistics. We can only go by own personal opinions, things that we see, things that we, notice at the top tiers of the game, the general feel for these champions. And therefore, every single one of us is going to see these champions differently. Some of the top champions for me might not be the top champions for you. Some of the champions you might think are amazing will inevitably be worse in my eyes, for instance, or I will not value them as much, and vice versa. A lot of that also depends on which game modes you focus on, which playstyles, mastery setups, and things like that you care for most. Ultimately, every single video I have been releasing, there is somebody thinking that they are super clever coming at these lists as some sort of a dig, saying like, these lists are, basically Battlegrounds rankings or something like that. And in almost every single video I have uploaded here, I have openly said that yes, Battlegrounds is one of the most important factors currently in the game, because all the higher end players choose who they will rank basically because of like 2 or 3 different criteria, depending on what teams you are in. Number 1 is Battlegrounds, number 2 is Alliance, or number 3 is Prestige for some alliances who still are in the Prestige race. That's the main kind of like choice for rank up. Obviously, Prestige doesn't really matter when determining champion quality, but other than that, Alliance War and Battlegrounds are the main, driving force in between deciding which champions get the catalyst love and attention from us. And I want to make that perfectly clear. Also, the reason why they are more important and therefore hence ranked higher than some random questing champions is because every single one of these champions ranked on these lists will also do great for rest of the content. The only viable kind of like exceptions are Necropolis or some other super highly specific content, but you cannot base champions value on a single piece of content that eventually is going to get outdated soon, right? Therefore, Aegon doesn't appear in the top of the list. But ultimately, for most part, for your daily play time, for your monthly EQs, for your story content, act content, Grandmaster's Gauntlet, stuff like that, the same champions do well, and those are the ones that you need for Battlegrounds, you need for Alliance War. And then, based on that, you pick teams that you use for questing. Quite simple as that. If you are at the beginner levels of the game, if you are in intermediate levels of the game, these champions will still be some of the best choices for you. There will be additional champions that might be useful for you. I'll grant you that. There will be champions that I do not consider because they are only viable specifically for questing. That could be a viable rank up choice. But for the most part, any single champion you take from these lists will also do good or incredibly well for, developing in mid to lower tiers. Now that I have explained that, stay calm, keep rational, tell me what you think. For sure, I do read those comments. But let's break down the top 10. And in spot number 10 at the moment. In spot number 10. Wait, before we get there, I do need to show you the old top 20 in its entirety. And already discussed, plenty of these champions have had a fairly significant fall from grace. So these lists do look significantly different right now. Obviously, some champions have remained their dominance. Some have moved slightly up, and somehow skyrocketed towards the top. So, let's go, and let's start with spot number 10, that is Future Antman. And Future Antman at the moment is one of the most frustrating champions to play. He is not necessarily as bad defensively in like a vanilla circumstance, but when there are some nodes that, complicate fights, then Future Antman can potentially be one of the nastiest champions. I fully believe that Future Antman could be one of the most banned champions this meta. I know I do ban him quite a lot, and that was also the reason why I ascended him, because I decided to go from defensive and getting bullied by Future Antman into tackling the problem head on and having myself the biggest possible version of Future Antman. Additionally, obviously, the thing that does give him value is the fact that he's also very, very solid defensively. And we already discussed how Nimrod effectively put himself out of the job destroying mutants. And Pham kind of covers the mutants that Nimrod doesn't, which is another huge, huge thing, because Bishop is very big in the more competitive game modes, and so is Havoc. And Nimrod obviously can do Havoc, but it is relatively slow compared because of the Inequity Mastery and the high energy resistance. And Bishop obviously will take a lot of his HP away, and Pham does both of those matchups flawlessly. On top of that, Pham does have a fairly favorable matchup with a handful of other high-tier defenders in battlegrounds, and we can definitely have seen this guy be present also in Alliance War Offensive. Some people have been bringing him in for specific fights and parts in Necropolis, as well as I have found out he does Storm Pyramid X and Sauron exceedingly well, or at the very least Storm Pyramid X and a handful of other fights. And yeah, that means we have ultimately what I deem to be the top tech champion at the moment. And I don't think it's too hard to deny it. He is likely the best 6-star Ascension choice that we do have right now. And he has very solid damage output, plenty of utility in there. One of the coolest power control mechanics that you can have, to a point where you can actually basically go an entire fight without letting opponent throw a special attack at all, ever. And then, again, in comes the glancing, in comes the damage cap, in comes his resistance to bleeds and incinerates, or more specifically, duration reduction. And the man's doing well right now. There's just no other way to put it. The man is a champion that has to be taken in consideration. Basically, whatever you do in the game right now, whether that is building your Alliance War defense, whether that is building your Alliance War offense, or choosing the champions for the paths, he is a champion that will force very specific matchups for him. And then obviously battlegrounds. The man works. So I am placing him at the moment in spot number 10. Spot number 9 is Absorbing Man. Now Absorbing Man, I think, kind of peaked and has taken a little bit of a step back in the last month or so, but ultimately still he does a ton of things across the entire game, which basically kind of, in my opinion, gives him the top spot in the Mystic class, because he is the most atypical Mystic champion, kind of like a brawler type Mystic, which champion that doesn't really nullify anything. However, he does force quick expiration on some key buffs, which obviously do complement him extremely nicely. But his value, again, lies in his versatility and the amount of matchup that he can take and the skillment involved in it. I already talked quite a lot in detail how, in my opinion, introduction of Absorbing Man has been a great service to the MCOC community at large, because of this champion, virtually every single player who actually has bothered to rank and use Absorbing Man has become a better player due to the necessity of the light intercepts, or the encouragement of the light intercepts, because you don't need to do the light intercepts in plenty of the matchups, and you can just use him in more limited capacity. But if you do want to get the best out of the champion, you basically by default got better at light intercepting, because that is something you practiced quite a bit. Now, granted, outside of battlegrounds or some questing scenarios, people don't necessarily like to rely on that, because it is still a bit more high-end skill type of thing to do. But at the same time, even at the basic skill level, the amount of matchups and fights that he handles, especially with some, addition of more specific nodes, it's just great, man. Like, he does so many different matchups, because you can customize what resistance he has, you can customize what immunities he has, what kind of, whether you have physical or energy based damage, and he's still the only champion that can fully switch from one or another, because there are a lot of champions that are more vulnerable to physical damage and physical hits. And you can have that. You can have him spend the entire fight doing only physical damage. Or if you need energy damage, you can switch to that, and you can spend the entire fight doing energy damage. That in itself gives him tremendous amount of utility. The way I kind of like to view Absorbing Man offensively at degrees, he's double the Guardian, in sense, because Guardian has like this massive energy resistance that helps him deal with, cold snaps and incinerates and shocks and stuff like that, and also the bleed. But Absorbing Man has that effectively with almost or just as high resistance, but also you can switch it to physical resistance and then take no damage from ruptures or, you know, regular base hits from other champions. You can block for days and then you can regen the damage taken. And that customizability with the reward of the skill, I think, is tremendously successful. Again, obviously not. There is no single champion that will thrive in like any meta in any condition. So there are seasons when we do see more of him. There are seasons when we see less of him. But ultimately, he is a champion that demands respect. Has demanded, you know, people's attention. Their catalysts, their tier 2 primordial dust. We do see a lot of 6-star rank 5 ascended absorbing mans. And obviously, we do see him pretty much every season in Alliance Wars just because how crazy OP he can be on the hazard shift lanes or any other lanes where he can trigger his immunities frequently. And then there is a subcategory of fights that he just destroys. If anyone, anything, any node tries to place an armor break on this champion, he just becomes like one of the biggest nukes in the entire game, which is always kind of fun to watch. And yeah, there are a ton of abilities that people, you know, are still kind of half unaware that he has. Like he has opponent's power gain effect mitigation, where when you block, you are actually reducing opponent's power gain and you are stealing it. And, you know, level 3 has some massive potent effects there too, giving him more crit damage and the way his damage scales that can have massive implications on the fight. Also, basically, you know, it's just very good. And that's why he is in top 10 and top 9 at the moment. I will be honest, I actually had Titania initially one spot below and Absorbing higher, but I wanted to respect the fact that Titania has been spoiled by Kabam for the last 3 months nearly, with the decay and sugar pill seasons, and with the new season where science champions are getting power increase. She just seems to work with all of that stuff. Her buff immunity is putting in a ton of work as well. And yeah, at the moment, she is one of the hottest champions in the game. And I'm not saying that just because of her ties. She genuinely does put in work both on defense. She's surprisingly good defensive pick because she does have very healthy health pool. And obviously, her going unblockable, unstoppable, indestructible can at the very least stall out some of the fights and make you, you know, sit that bit out, but also can catch people off guard. And to carry on, offensively, she matches up extremely well. She has one of the best matchup ratios in the game, as in she can go after skill champions, she can go after other science champions. She obviously obliterates pretty much all of the mystic champions. She can deal with a ton of tech champions, including, for instance, FAM, which has been a problem. She can, you know, fight the cosmics. She can, she just doesn't really care about class relationships, and she doesn't discriminate in between the matchups that she has. And that is definitely a marquee sign of an extremely successful design, in my personal opinion. And obviously, then there's the level 3, which basically allows her to nuke down just about any fight, even at like lower rank levels. And that's Titania. Currently, right now, I think she's one of the most desirable champions in the game, period. I do, however, see obviously her losing a bit of ground in the upcoming couple of months. So I do want to warn about that, and that will be due to the nature of Alliance War and the Valiant's meta shifting. I don't foresee that being for long term, but for next couple of months, she will definitely have like a diminished role in the game. And you should be prepared if you are, you know, choosing which champions to invest right now. Let's move on. Human Torch. And Human Torch, again, is a champion that just demands everybody's attention and respect. Now, obviously, he has taken a bit of a step back. He does have a bit of a Nimrod factor where he's kind of putting himself out of the job. On top of that, I do personally think that he is one of the main reasons why we hardly see Mystic champions in Necropolis. And if we do see them, in majority of them, Kabam kind of made sure that you will not necessarily want to use Human Torch for those fights. And it kind of felt personal there just because of how hard he wrecked Abyss of Legends, and they probably wanted to torch-proof Necropolis slightly more. At the same time, he still obviously has the fights where he shines, like Strife or Diablo, for instance. And then on top of it, just the mere existence of Human Torch is often enough to keep entire Mystic class in check. He's also has and always pretty much will be one of the more banned champions. And the best way to describe him is we often divide the metas on whether Torch or Archangel work or do not work in those metas. Maybe a bit less so recently because Kabam again definitely have made sure that they are trying to slow him down, but he still is pretty much everywhere. And starting the upcoming season, I think we're going to see much more of the guy. The things that are again taking a bit away from him is the scoring change, the fact that he does not necessarily have the best block proficiency and he does require taking some block hits to access his damage ramp. So that's not ideal with the change to the scoring and with the release of 7 stars and him effectively being comparatively squishier than he used to be. And those are definitely some major factors. At the same time, Human Torch is a champion that will never completely fade away or become irrelevant because Kabam continuously keep releasing champions that does have obviously energy attacks in their kit. We still only have one champion in the entire game that has like no flame immunity, and that isn't even too important because not too many people use Iceman to begin with. So effectively in your average, situation, you will never encounter anyone that is immune to no flames. And that gives again him even more value because he just works. He puts in work even in like suboptimal matchups. He can be perfectly adequate in terms of his fighting speed. Like again, he's one of the champions that can take down like a random Korg, for instance, on equal ranking in about 60 seconds, which is like not bad at all, which is fairly atypical for a science champion. And again, a champion that has and will always have a place in Alliance War, a place in Battlegrounds, a place in questing, nuking down the bosses, or just an entire lane, depending on the class of the opponents that you meet. So do not ever underestimate this guy, and we'll see where he goes from there, but it's hard for me to see him falling out of top 10 pretty much ever. Moving on, Kate Bishop. And Kate Bishop has been one of the most successful releases of the year. Offensively, you definitely have to name her as the most successful and capable 2023 champion. She is one of those rare type of champions that effectively has an in-fight ramp up that's quick and potent enough for her to be considered almost like a nuke champion. And then, obviously, in the longer fight, she has the capability of extending her damage output even further, access even more utility, and just, put in a tremendous amount of work there. She is probably the best Necropolis option if you care most about doing it cheaply. She cannot do anywhere near as many fights as Aegon can, obviously, but she does have much better solo capability than Aegon, and that does mean a lot if you're trying to save items and if you're willing to take your time, because she does have about double the fight time than Aegon does for many fights, but it might be worth it if it saves you units. And again, she has gone from strength to strength to strength. We do see her some in Alliance War. I'm not going to say we see her that much in Alliance War, but she definitely has a presence there. Obviously, in any meta that she does work in Battleground, she's always one of the most feared champions. Again, similar to Titania, I do think we're going to see her slightly less. Well, unlike Titania, who I think we will see less in the next 2 metas, we have seen less of her in the current season of Battlegrounds, and we probably will not see that much of her in the upcoming season of Battlegrounds as well, because there are very specific nodes and conditions that should not, however, take much away from Kate Bishop at all. And just mentioning that again, because that was one of the deciding factors for me, for instance, not to ascend her just yet and, do that slightly later. But just another phenomenal champion, and this is another one of the 4 champions that DLL has designed this year. And she is one of the 3 best champions released in this year. DLL made all of the top 3 champions this year, and that again kind of speaks for the quality of his work and simultaneously for the quality of Kate Bishop as an end result of that work. And again, a compliment I think well earned at this point, because even the more recent champion, which according to people might not be quite as busted and broken and successful of a content release as Photon, Hate, and Absorbing Man, is still one of the better champions this year. Still. And yeah, the value in Kate Bishop, again, obviously does come from her high damage output and the fact that her Cold Snap is a passive that also obviously shuts down their Wade. She doesn't care about, all the nodes that interact with debuffs or punish the debuffs. Again, in case of like a lot of skilled champions, she doesn't care about them shrugging it off. Her special attacks gain passive true accuracy, so she can bypass a lot of auto-blocking champions by utilizing heavy attack and then going into level 1, which flows perfectly with her playstyle to begin with. She does have the guaranteed intercepts if you need them because of her riposte away effect. And again, plenty of customizability, miss counters, counters to auto-block, counters to debuffs. Access to bleed, by the way, that not a lot of people know, but Caltrops is in fact bleed damage, and it does interact with many of the nodes that require you to utilize bleed specifically or boost bleed damage or something like that. All that being said, the champion is just amazing. So, wish we had a 7-star. Wish we had a 7-star. Wish we knew as a community better. But moving on, spot number 5, a champion that just edged out Kate in the 2023 release is Photon. And again, I'm not going to make an argument for Photon being better than Kate offensively because she isn't. I will, however, make an argument about Photon having bigger impact in the game. And again, the best way how to convey my thoughts and thought process of this is that Photon is pretty much the only or the premier champion I have seen top tier endgame players chase as a 6-star, immediately rank her up and ascend her as a 6-star. That also exists as a 7-star. For most of the champions, people are much more hesitant to ascend them if they have a chance to get those 7-stars, and they're trying to save these resources for like the obviously kind of like marquee champions that likely will not be 7-stars. But Photon is one of the very, very few and the most prominent champion that people just immediately acquire, immediately rank, immediately sig, and immediately ascend, and immediately put in the deck. And, use her pretty much everywhere. And again, that definitely does not go down to her defensive capability alone. I'm still amazed how many people are sleeping on Photon offensively. She obviously destroys pretty much vast majority of the Mystic matchups, but then also has plenty of favorable matchups across the board in between her access to plentiful debuffs, access to energy damage, her ability to reverse the regeneration as well, her massive energy resist, and altogether, she just gets plenty of those fights done without many issues. Additionally, one of the best things about Photon offensively definitely has been the fact that she handles the AI shenanigans tremendously well for the most part, because she does have a built-in massive safety net of her. If she accidentally gets parried by the opponent, it effectively just ramps her up because she triggers untouchable, and that means you don't really have much to worry about. And then on top of it all, she does have access to taunt, which typically ensures opponents throwing the special attacks, unless it doesn't, but it does help in general. And then she is a champion that feels extremely sturdy, feels extremely reliable to use offensively. She's not the fastest in fights where she starts unramped, therefore not the fastest, let's say, in Valorant's fight, but still plenty of the speed as well in that department. Like, you can take equal rank Rintrus and Sasquatches typically in about 60 seconds, which is, more than speedy enough considering her threat on defense and opponent's necessity to, again, accommodate for that. And yeah, I do think Photon is the most valuable, the most influential champion released this year in MCOC. And I wanted to reflect that in rankings as well. Moving on, spot number 5, Kingpin. And Kingpin was higher on this list previously. Kingpin was in spot number 3, and I think this is still appropriate ranking for him because undeniably his impact on the game has been reduced slightly. He hasn't been a champion that goes upwards at the moment. He has taken a bit of a step back. At the same time, he is a champion that is an invaluable part of the game in virtually every single game mode. He is one of the most banned and slash automatically not banned used champions for Alliance Wars due to his power to nuke things, eat level 3s, and obviously the degen, build the accuracy reduction, as well as the attack reduction from the opponents, ability to infinitely shrug debuffs. His defensive prowess is not to be understated as well. Like a great example, and this is again one of the things that I find incredibly befuddling. People continuously say Kingpin's easy to fight, Kingpin's easy to kill, and stuff like that. And yeah, obviously Kingpin has the champions that do nuke him and do extremely well against him on defense. And typically it would be like Bishop or a handful of others. At the same time, though, he is a champion that will often require very specific counters, and then if you do put some node combinations in consideration, he's going to be an insanely hard defender. And the best examples to defend his defensive value right now is the current meta. He's genuinely one of the toughest defenders to go up against. For his increased combat power rate, for his long level 1 duration, and him creating distance during it, and because his specials also go unblockable. And effectively, for most of the people, fighting Kingpin just accounts to infinitely trying to bait special attacks, praying that he throws the level 1. If he goes to level 2, then sitting that out. Additional thing that will prove Kingpin's value, in my opinion, is going to be the next meta. But Kingpin's going to be completely useless or all offensively, because he will not have access to a damaging debuff to work with Polka Dot power. But flip it around, how many champions will do well against Kingpin on defense? Because he's going to likely shrug all those debuffs, if not instantly, then very quickly once he reaches the 8 rages, right? So it will be tremendously hard to go up against Kingpin in the next meta as well, even if he will be offensively, again, useless. Defensively, he should be one of the hardest champions to tackle in that meta. So that's, just food for thought, because, the man is a very tough defender, regardless of whether people like to admit it or not, just like Hercules is an extremely useful defender for a lot of Battlegrounds metas and matchups. And, yeah, the biggest thing to say about Kingpin, and, here's the thing that some people might call me biased again, because I have been one of the people always advocating for Kingpin. I got a lot of backlash when I put Kingpin on the top of the skill list the first time over Nick Fury, or even currently over Kate Bishop. He should not be as powerful and as valuable if you look at him on the paper. That's the best way to describe it, because he doesn't have insanely busted abilities. He has some shrug off, he has increased combat power rate, and that, level 1 degen. And that's for the most part, it's kind of it. But it's all he ever really needs. He's one of those champions who has very simple kit. It just works time and time again. So, Kingpin, spot number 4 right now, I think, is well deserved. Spot number 3, a champion that kind of took over Kingpin, I think, in terms of his current value, is Scorpion. And again, this is another champion that I got a bit of a pushback when I placed him at top of the science class, but I do genuinely believe that he is the most valuable science champion and one of the most potent champions in the game currently. There's a very good reason why this champion in particular was the very first choice for ascending, for ascensions, even let's say for going Hercules. And that is because, just like Kingpin, he seems to work in pretty much every game mode in, majority of the metas. And that's another thing. We have champions that are super explosive. Let's say once every 6 months, there's going to be meta node combinations in Alliance War or Battlegrounds or a piece of content in story mode. We're going to see some crazy stuff come out. And then we have champions that do either well or really well vast majority of the time. And then there are a couple of metas where they might not be as valuable. And that's kind of the thing with Scorpion. Scorpion, I think, has been one of the most consistent champions in terms of how much of the time and how many of the metas and how many of the months and how many of the piece of content and node combinations he works. And he has, pretty much. It is due to his access to immunity, so he can, for instance, potentially take on some of the hazard shift nodes. and his healing because of it. And because of that healing, he always is like extremely consistent with his results, most of the time finishing fights with 100%, and also being able to take a lot of matchups which he otherwise wouldn't. And then, we have access to 3 different damage over time effects, which also will give him access to either direct physical or energy damage, which is a big part of this game right now. Like we see currently, where champions have massive energy resistance, like we will see soon, where we will need damage over time effects in order to be able to gain power with polka dot power. And I don't think there is got a single champion in the game that has, the ability, well, all 3 immunities that Scorpion has. There are a handful of champions in skill class, obviously as natural enemy of the science class, that will have, superbly potent shrug of abilities that will stop Scorpion. But if you're looking in general, he is one of those champions that you will draft and you will get a use out of him in this meta, in the upcoming meta, in the Alliance War seasons, and so on and so forth. Speaking of Alliance War seasons, we are all talking about, opponents being unblockable and them doing a ton of block damage. And then there is Scorpion, right? Because Scorpion not only has access to Taunt, which enables him to block unblockable attacks, which also interacts with Inequity and reduces their attack there. And then on top of it all, he does have the Petrify, where opponents will likely have willpower in Alliance War, and he will be able to regen significant portion of that block damage that you are taking. And that is Scorpion. He just has like the most needed, the most current, the most actual things in his kit for right now in the game. And all of those mechanics come together pretty much perfectly. The only kind of criticism that I heard about Scorpion was that, quote-unquote, Scorpion has a risky playstyle, involves charging his heavy attack, and the AI is tricky, and they might not play into it. And that comment immediately told me that the person just doesn't play Scorpion, because nobody really charges that heavy attack, or people hardly ever charge that heavy attack when using Scorpion. It is not something you do in 90% of your fights, or it's not something you have to do. Scorpion has more than adequate damage output if you never try to go for the quote-unquote risky play and, charge your heavy attack and go for the big burst and level 2. So just to put that out there. So no, Scorpion doesn't have a risky playstyle. In fact, Scorpion is one of the most safe, reliable, and sustainable champions in the game, again, because he does have the AI manipulation, because he has customizable immunities and damage types in between direct, physical, and energy. And also, he has, super high block proficiency and basically infinite healing available to him. That's tremendously potent in both of the competitive game modes due to defenders having willpower mastery on. So I do think currently, right now, Scorpion is genuinely the 3rd best champion in the game. Those have been my reasons. You, again, are free to disagree, but to me, it might make sense. And spot number 2, I don't think a lot of people will necessarily agree with this one. I think Hulkling is one of those champions where everybody loves to say that he's good, or he's really good, or he's close to the top, or he's one of the best. I don't think many people would put him at the 2nd best champion in the game right now. But I do. And this one actually is because of Kabam. This one is actually because of what Kabam said specifically. And obviously mixed in together with my own personal thoughts and experiences and so on and so forth. Hulkling is the most used champion in Battlegrounds, period. Offensively and defensively, like in both those criteria. That means he's the most drafted champion, he's the most placed champion on defense, and he's, or one of the, and he's one of the most used champions offensively. Overall, he is the most used champion in Battlegrounds, and that kind of becomes obvious because Hulkling has been one of those champions where you think he will not work in majority of the metas, and then he ends up smashing those metas. Like we thought he's not going to work in the previous meta where opponents have a lot of power gain, and yeah, it was kind of tricky, but I still lost so many matches to Hulkling because I kind of underestimated him, I discounted him, I thought it's going to be impossible to manage the power gain, but hey, guess what? It turned out to be possible, and I still got my butt whooped by Hulkling more than enough. And the same with the current meta, with opponents gaining extra power, with Buffet Node eating his buffs. It turns out he can still easily out damage that region in most of the fights. And that has pretty much always been the case with Hulkling. He goes up against the odds and he just nukes things down without asking too many questions. And obviously, he has plenty of role in Alliance War because of his immunities to power control mechanics and his access to Pierce and his ability to inflict a ton of damage through block as well as nuke things, period, because in Alliance War you can easily just give him a power boost and just start spamming level 2s, which is a completely filthy prospect to begin with. Then he also has his poison and shock immunity that enables him to do some of the fights, many other champions wouldn't necessarily, and so on and so forth. He's great for plenty of questing situations and a lot of bosses across the board. The man just works right now. Also, another indicator of the popularity of Hulkling and the use of Hulkling. I don't think I know a single mid to high tier player who has a low ranked Hulkling. Virtually for most of the other champions, I at least know some people who are like, my touch still rank 3, instead of rank 5, or I still haven't ranked up this champion or that champion or something like that. I think Hulkling is one of those champions where virtually every single player, when you pull him awakened or unawakened, you just take him up. You just do. And these lists, again, have kind of moved from which champions are theoretically, in some imaginary situations, the best or most capable, to which champions actually demand the most attention from the community, which champions are actually the most used ones, which champions, I would recommend people to rank on the stream if they asked me a question to choose, which champions I myself rush to rank up, or if I don't, there has to be like a very specific reason too. And yeah, pretty much any conversation that we are having, if Hulkling is one of the options, then you will almost always get that nomination, get that recommendation. And with Hulkling, in most cases, people don't even ask because they have all already seen and experienced, getting their butts kicked by Hulkling on defense, or seeing people nuke things with Hulkling on offense against them. And I genuinely believe that currently, right now, Hulkling is the second best champion in the game. That's what it. And obviously, we all know who's the best champion. I mean, this is getting boring to talk about, so, it typically involves some level of profanity and discussion about how Kabam screwed up. And, everything I have ever said about Hercules is still true. One of the biggest mistakes that Kabam has ever taken. There is shooting yourself in the feet, and then there is completely obliterating your ballsack with a 44 Magnum. This is self-hatred on a corporate level. This single champion has given them more problems, frustration, and also, saved Tukabam than any other champion recently. This single champion has made life easier for vast majority of the community. The existence of this champion alone makes AQ tolerable. And the existence of this champion has made players worse. That is the opposite of what Absorbing Man did. And this is not objectively a good thing, by the way. This is just reality. If Hercules did not exist, we as players at large right now would be better skill-wise. I'm not saying we would be better for it. I'm not saying we would have done all the content and everything else. But if we're looking purely at skill, a release of Absorbing Man forced us to learn. And we did. And we became better. Release of Hercules made us fat and lazy and made us not care about opponents' abilities, made us not care about our health bar, it made us not care about farming health potions or obtaining health potions because revive, go, go, go. It made us not care about AQ fights at all because Herc blitzes through it all. It made us not care about much of monthly and story content. And it made us just, be able to trivialize the content by revive spamming. And we all know that this is not a secret. Kabam is making nodes specifically and champions specifically to counter and slow down Hercules, but it's not necessarily working because he's that busted. Again, the best way to describe Hercules, like how many champions are ramp up champions with cross-fight abilities that you should be ramping up across multiple fights and all that, and are still one of the fastest nuke champions in any game mode, on top of having pretty much the most utility or matchups that you can do in the game period. And that, explodes to virtually 95% of the champions in the game if you don't care about your health bar. Obviously, in game mode like Battlegrounds or Alliance War, where Assassin can mess with you, or, in general, having health is helpful, you cannot always do that. But he still is great. He still is almost ever present in Battlegrounds, because you do have wonderful AI manipulation. You do have the stun immunity. You do have additional damage, burst of damage on every single hit. You do have ability to play with or without buffs should you choose to do so, pretty much, or at the very least control exactly when you acquire the buffs. You do have a ton of things in your kit that still work even if you're not accessing his greatest strength, which is obviously the cheese factor of his immortality. And again, I feel sorry for, I believe, who was it that made this guy? Was it Kabam Broccoli? I think it was Kabam Broccoli, right? So this was I kind of feel like this was Kabam Broccoli's middle finger to the Kabam company as a whole when he left through the door, because everybody else was left cleaning up the mess that Hercules has made of this game. Right now we are Necropolis. We have specific nodes in order to prevent people from revive spamming Herc Go doing, well, we did it with Aegon, and not much of a difference, to be honest, but, they had to take in consideration the Hercules thing. We do have incursions where everybody just takes the biggest Hercules that they have and rushes to zone 25 to a point where they are adding, Fate Seal and Nullification nodes and a whole bunch of nodes that effectively stop you from completely cheesing everything with Hercules and stun locking opponents, or, being just extremely filthy with your immortality. And the same goes pretty much everywhere in the game. You can clearly see that this is one of the biggest pain points Kabam has right now in the game at large. And rightfully so, because he is filthy. He is ridiculous. Like, you don't use the term overpowered in MCOC too much, or at least I don't. Because for the most part, the game has done a relatively good job keeping the balance. But we have had, like, 4 things in this game that have been truly overpowered. Pt.2 Scarlet Witch, infinitely hit the opponent, stun lock, heal, power drain them, just stupid. That was overpowered. Pt.12 OG Tor, when a maxed out 4-star could out damage 99.9% of the 7-star rank 3s today. That was insane amounts of damage that you could push out from that champion. That was overpowered in the brute force damage. Quake, that ignored 90+% of the game and game's abilities without interacting with any of it. Imagine how devastating it was to design champions while Quake existed at a reasonable power level. Because they must have felt like, what's the point? People are just going to Quake this champion. Right? That was arguably the biggest mistake that they made with Quake. But I think it was unintentional, because they didn't realize you could play her that way. And then, the 4th biggest mistake, the current error that they have, is Hercules. It just is, I'm going to tell you how you know exactly how big of a mistake Hercules is. Because I don't think there is a single person playing this game remotely seriously that hopes that we will see a 7-star Hercules anytime soon. And that is exactly effectively what Kabam has done in past with the champions that they are terrified from. Still don't have even a 6-star Quake, right? Not getting one. Unless they completely rework her. We're not getting a 7-star Quake either. OG Tor and Scarlet Witch only exist as higher star levels only because Kabam completely nerfed them. And even then, it took them forever to release them as 5 and 6 stars. And you just know it's going to happen with Hercules. We are not seeing Hercules as a 7-star in foreseeable future for sure. Only chance we will ever see Hercules released in the higher star level is if Kabam, nerf him or rework him. You just know it. You just know it. And you can't necessarily say that for the rest of the champions. Rest of the champions on these lists I look at and I think it's like, yeah, eventually we'll probably gonna get the 7 stars. You know, many of them they're gonna save for later or something like that. With Hercules, no chance. They're not doing that again. They're not buying that same ticket to that same ride called Hercules ever again. And it's good, by the way. I don't want another Hercules in the game. I don't think we need a 7-star Hercules in the game because, again, it made us all lazier. I don't like a game where you can do 95% of the content with one champion. I do, however, think about made their bed and they have to lie in it because, again, of the amount of cash, sweat, and tears that people invested in acquiring these champions. I think it would be completely unfair to change anything about Hercules right now, again, because of the insane amount of money that so many people invested in trying to acquire Hercules. But I completely support not releasing him as 7-star. Just like I completely support not releasing Quake as 6 or 7-star. On a personal level, I'd love those champions. On like an analytical level, looking into the game and thinking what's best for the game, hope we never see anything as broken as Quake and Hercules again. And I hope we never see them at higher star level. As brutal as it sounds. I would love to have them. I would love to wreck content for years to come with Hercules. But ultimately, it's not good for the game. It's not good for the players. I think. Anyways, that is my top 20 champion list in the game right now, currently. So, see the old top and the new top. This is part 2. If you are interested as for my reasoning for the rankings of spot 11 to 20 and most notable champions missing from this list, like Kitty Pryde for instance, then you will have to look up the previous part of this video series. That said, now we can see that next video will be top 10 BG attackers, specifically where we only take in consideration offensive capabilities and battlegrounds. Period. Right, that will do for now. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about